Hello, this section is on music, and this particular section, section 2 of music, is about classical music. So remember in class, we've listened to 5 different classical songs. You've also read about them. So in case there is some confusion or you need some clarity about the songs, I'm going to explain very briefly about the 5 songs and the era in which they were composed in. Remember that, to succeed in acting decathlon, it'll require more than just, these PowerPoints or even the sample quizzes. Make sure you read thoroughly through the section and you understand everything that's on there. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. So first of all, we talk about 6 different musical style periods, starting with the Middle Ages, moving on to the Renaissance, Baroque, Classical, Romantic, and Modern. So what we're going to focus on, particularly in academic decathlon, is the tail end of Romanticism and into Modernism. You should know that these are the 6 periods of Western music, so it doesn't apply to all nations or all cultures. And also know that these different styles, there's no end point and beginning point. It's not like, okay, this year we're stopping doing classical music style and then we're going to go into romantic style. They kind of mixed in between each other, and one was still going on while another one started. So we'll talk about, again, particularly we're going to talk about modernism in this section. So modernism, what is modernism? So we're talking about the 20th century. It's a mix or combination of clinging to the past and embracing the future. When we're talking about clinging to the past, we talk about, as you can see here, the development of the canon. So we were, again, in classical music, we had, I guess they still stuck to the popular repertoire that was still going on during Romanticism. So body of music contained works of like Mozart and Beethoven, like that's very popular, so they continue to do stuff like that. There's a growth of post-Romanticism, so we're talking about a conservative style, nothing new, nothing experimental. We also have the flourishing of American concert life. We had, I guess you could say, more and more symphonies and organizations that did concerts that got really, really popular at this time. A particular one, as you can see here, Leopold Stokowski, he was at the Philadelphia Orchestra, and he was so popular and so famous because of these concerts. And lastly, there was a rise of conservatories, and conservatories are kind of like schools, and what they do is they educate musicians. So all of these things contributed to at least modernism having elements of the past. But even though they had stuff of the past, they also had new things to it. So more composers started to break with the past. It says here, unprecedented diversity of popular and classical styles. So in the music scene at that era, we have like a lot of diversity. Not everyone was doing the same type of music. And lastly, with a lot of things, because of the new technology, with production and distribution of music, we had new instruments, and with new instruments, we had new types of music. So new instruments at this time, we're talking about saxophone and tuba. So we have new elements to the music that was not there in the past. So talking about technology, one of the 2 of the bigger inventions at the time. First, we're talking about radio. Radio, as you could tell, if we listen to the radio, it created larger audiences for music. It's not limited to the rich people or the upper class. Now everyone can listen to music. Listeners could hear a wide range of styles. So the great thing about radio is that it doesn't just limit just to one artist or to one composer, as opposed to in the past where if you were just listening to one song, like you can only listen to that just composer. Now you can hear a wide range of styles. Before the 20th century, music can only be experienced live by a limited number of people. But now, again, with recordings and radio broadcasts, we're talking about millions and millions of people can now hear high-quality music in their own homes. Telephones and telegraphs, they help improve communication. And the wireless technology helped further facilitate the communication. So here on the left, this is Guglielmo Marconi. He was the one that, quote-unquote, invented Morse code, and he was the one that wirelessly transmitted Morse code. So as we were broadcasting more complex sounds and doing more wireless stuff, we're talking about, again, full musical performances eventually that could be transmitted wirelessly through radio. Also in the, also changed or also new in technology was how did they record the music. So the very, if you follow this arrow right here, the very, very first recording technology was they used to record music onto tin foil. Thomas Edison actually invented it, but he said that was more for like business offices. And then he went to something called a wax cylinder. Here on the right, you see this picture of, this is Thomas Edison, and that's what they call a wax cylinder. And they started basically with the wax cylinders. Instead of doing business offices, you could send wax cylinders or sell wax cylinders to the public. By 1910, we started to have more and more wealthy families own something called a gramophone, and they could play flat discs. So the next in the progression is called flat discs. They're easier to produce a whole bunch of, or a lot of, than wax cylinders. Wax cylinders took a long time to make, but flat discs they could make and make very fast, and a whole lot of them. And then we're talking about commercial production. This is, again, as you can see here in these bullet points, it was pioneered by Thomas Edison. Like we said, he was the one that basically pioneered the technology for recording music. And because of this new technology, opera singer Enrico Caruso, he became super popular because his recordings, he was an opera star in 1920, and because he could record his music, or one of the first people to record his music, he made over $100,000 per year, which you could tell is a lot of money now, which is also a lot of money way back in the 1920s. They also, other technologies you need to know about, the trench model for soldiers. So this was a gramophone in which soldiers that were fighting in World War I could take with them to the trenches. So it was a quote-unquote portable. Think of it as the iPod at the time. So even though gramophones became popular, more and more people wanted devices that not just played back music, but you're starting to hear people wanting to record their own music or record sound. So scholars, they're called ethnomusicologists, they began making field recordings at this time as well, so that folk music or songs that were not recorded, they could record them as well. And because now you can record music or record folk music, this also influenced musicians at the time to make different styles of music. So the second technology we're talking about is film. Just so you know the history of film. So in around 1890, live musicians started performing scores for films. And in 1891, they started to synchronize images with recorded sound. So not yet, you can't watch a movie and have sound with it. What they did is they just have images that, like a slideshow almost, and they played it with recorded sound. So on the left, this is a kinetophone, and this is how they used to play short films with sound. As you can tell, like, it's not really meant for more than a few people. This is only one person using it. So in the 1900s, there was a debate over the problem of how do you amplify film with music, film with sound, and have it played for a room full of people or for a large audience. So in 1927, what happened was they started to adopt what they call sound-on-film technology, where they actually put the sound on top of the film instead of having playing a soundtrack and then playing the pictures at the same time. So a few short films with sound were produced, and then it wasn't until 1927 something called The Jazz Singer, a film called The Jazz Singer was one of the first ones where audiences could hear spoken dialogue in a feature film. So it was the first time we didn't have like a silent film. So we're going to talk about, in this section, 5 different songs, and each of the songs, why they're chosen, is because they represent 5 different eras in modernism. So modernism, for example, there's innovations in art. So you can see here on the left, this is Jackson Pollock. His innovation was these little drip paintings, so it looks like, using drip to make pictures. But also in music there was innovation. So these are called tone clusters. Those of you that aren't musically inclined, I'm not musically inclined. These are called tone clusters, where they basically have blocks of sound. So maybe a pianist will press a group of keys using his fist, or maybe an entire forearm. So we're talking about like just giant blocks of sound, and that was, I guess at that time, it was very innovative. So the very first piece, the first song, represents the era of Impressionism. Impressionism had its origins in French art, pioneered by Monet. So here's an example, like a painting of a Japanese bridge. So what is Impressionism? Impressionism, as we talked about before in art, we are emphasizing color and light. We have forms that are very vague. We can't really tell what they are exactly. A good quote here, it says, Impressionists, they render not the landscape, but the sensation produced by the landscape. So Impressionism, think of this. So this whole slide right here, think of Impressionism. Okay. What is Impressionism in music, though? So in music, we're talking about symbolism. So we have poetic movement, imagery. Again, think about that picture I just showed you. We're talking about vague, dreamlike atmospheres, maybe breaks in the flow of the text. So we're talking very symbolic, poetic imagery, dreamy, symbolic. How do you convey that musically? We're talking about vague forms, unconventional chords and scales, a weak rhythmic pulse, and tone colors. So we're talking about this is how you convey symbolism musically. So the music choice and then there's this video. I'm going to skip over the video because this video will be too long. But the very first song that we listened to that represents Impressionism, or this type of music that we were listening to, or the type of symbolism that we were talking about, was again, I don't know how to pronounce this, voiles, and this is from Preludes. You should know the composer of each song. This one is by Debussy, 1909. The genre is prelude, a genre of character pieces. Form is ABA. I'll explain what form means. And then the instrumentation, the instruments is just a piano by itself. So it's a short piano work. It's a character piece. It was influenced by Chopin. And again, it has origins in prelude. So what happens is, in this particular piece, not only is it ambiguous, but also the translation of the title is ambiguous. Does it mean the veil? Does it mean the sail? Again, ambiguity, impressionism, that's basically what it is. So when we talk about ABA form, what that means is that basically there's three, in this particular case, there's 4 sections in the song. There's a first section, a second section, a third section, and they have like a conclusion they call the coda. So ABA represents kind of like, if you think about like verses in a song, like it's a style in the song that they repeat again. So they do a section. The first section is called whole tone, and then they go into a second section where they switch to a pentatonic scale, and then they go back to a whole tone type scale. It's kind of hard to tell where it switches between A to B and B to A, but there are, just so you know, that the form is ABA. So now that you know Impressionism, now that you know Impressionism, the second one you should know is Expressionism. Expressionism is, those of you that listen to the song, you guys always say it's the creepy song. Well, think of Expressionism as the creepy era, or the creepy style. So we're talking about extreme emotions, not serene beauty. So here's a picture that represents Expressionism, extreme emotions. So they're talking about dark inner reality with the unconscious mind. So here's another picture that represents Expressionism. Some of you may have seen this picture called The Scream. So again, this very dark, like just crazy stuff, crazy emotions. That's Expressionism. So the pioneers of Expressionism. So we're going to talk about this later also. We're talking about 3 particular people: Arnold Schoenberg, Alban Berg, and Anton Webern, and they kind of all came from the same family called the Second Viennese School. I guess it's not really a real school, but they just call this group the Second Viennese School. So the song, as you remember, and you can listen to it as well, Perrault Lunaire. People say the creepy song. The actual song is called Not, and it's from Perrault Lunaire. The composer is Schoenberg. Schoenberg, again, is an expressionist, made in 1912. The poet, there's a poet named Albert Giraud, and what he did is he made a whole bunch of poems, 50 poems, about this character called Perrault. Perrault was a clown, or you could say a creepy clown, and of these poems, they talk about his misadventures or what he does or whatever. And from that poetry, Schoenberg composed a song that would go along with these poems. The genre is called song cycle. The instruments that you can hear: piano, cello, flute, clarinet, violin, and voice. And this delivery style, this may be a new word for you. It's called Sprechstimme. That means, that translates to spoken song. So it's basically half sung, half spoken type song. So again, this is Perrault, a creepy clown. I have a quick, first of all, the characteristics that's old and traditional. We have ABA-CA. So you remember the last song, Voiles, it has ABA-CA. Or the last one was ABA. This one is ABA-CA. This is used as a form called I suck at pronouncing these things, passaglia. And in passaglia, we're talking about a repeated bass line. And in this particular case, the bass line is called an ostinato. And then we also have word painting. This is music reflecting the images of the text. The expressionist characteristics, we're talking about dark, low instruments, like you hear it at the very beginning of the song, or a fermata, a long held note, and you'll hear it again when you hear the song. Playing on the bridge creates a scratchy sound in the strings. And lastly, again, we talked about Sprechstimme, so going between singing, then speaking, then singing, then speaking, that's that. So I'm not going to play the whole song, but just so you see what we're talking about, you'll remember the song when I play it, but I just want to play this quick video for you. This is a performance of Not from Pierre Lunaire, and the soprano is dressed like that creepy clown that I just talked about in the last couple slides. So just so you can see it, I don't want to play the whole video. Let me fast forward a little bit. Sorry if it's scary. So there's that creepy clown type thing that we were talking about. You can hear the long held note. We were talking about Expressionism. I think it'll be easy for you to know what Expressionism is. Okay, Primitivism. Primitivism, we're talking about something completely different than Expressionism. Primitivism sounds like primitive. We're talking about elements and elemental human existence. So the inspirations, we're talking about traditional art, landscape art, the art of Africa and the South Pacific. Emphasis on bold color, simple lines. Here's a landscape picture that we're talking about. This is Primitivism. Okay, one of the, I guess you could say, the pioneers in this type of style. His name is Paul Gauguin, and what he did is, I guess, he went to the Pacific and he was inspired by this, and he started this whole movement. So his style also influenced composers such as Stravinsky. So the third song that we listened to that we've played in class is called The Rite of Spring. Igor Stravinsky was the composer in 1913. This is actually a ballet song, or in the ballet genre, with a full orchestra, and again, this is Primitivism. So this is the Ballet Russe. This is the concert series that they had in Paris. There was actually Russian ballet, and it was brought to Paris. It was led by a person called Sergei Diaghilev, and Stravinsky had three groundbreaking ballets other than The Rite of Spring: Firebird, Petrushka, and now The Rite of Spring. And we listened to this in class. The scenario is in two parts, or the story really, that it's broken up in half. The first part of the song is called The Adoration of Earth, and the second half is called The Sacrifice. The actual ballet had medieval Russian costumes, and the intentionally jagged, awkward choreography did not recall traditional ballet. So people had an idea of what ballet was, and then when they saw The Rite of Spring, it was completely what they've never seen before. It was, again, as it says here, intentionally jagged. The choreography was awkward, and some of the drawings, if you want to see like what the ballet would look like and the costuming, here's a picture on the right. So it has kind of some expressionism in it. It has distortions of familiar sounds. So it has, like, for example, an opening has a high bassoon solo, so it's kind of expressionist. But it also has some folk music influences. The rhythms are disorienting and unpredictable, but it has some links between humanity and nature, which is the definition of Primitivism. So again, we have the opening solo to start, and then a complicated texture to go on to the rest of the song. So here's his quote: "My idea was that the prelude should represent the awakening of nature, the scratching, gnawing, wiggling of birds and beasts." That was Stravinsky. So here is a picture of Stravinsky. It has what they call multiple simultaneous ostinati, which is brief, melodic, rhythmic snippets that repeat over and over and over again. So these multiple simultaneous snippets repeating over and over again. But it also has an unstable rhythmic pattern. They call this polymeter. And these are different instruments playing in different meters at the same time. So that's what they mean by unstable. We got different instruments, they got different meters, and they're all playing at the same time. I guess that's the piece that we're talking about being unstable. So those of you that are, again, musically inclined, we have an E flat dominant seventh with an F flat major triad, and this is basically his new chord. Interesting enough, in terms of the backstory of this song, what happened was that in the premiere in 1913, when they premiered this ballet in Paris, because it was so different, some people laughed, some people were shouting. So for some reason, people were even fighting in the audience, and this caused like such a riot that the people that were dancing, the ballet dancers, couldn't even hear the music. So what ended up happening is that the composer or the conductor had to basically count the beats for the dancers. That's how loud and crazy it was. So there was a riot at the premiere. So because of the crazy, wild choreography and music, it didn't go so well. But they did it again a few weeks later in London instead of Paris, and it actually went pretty well. What ended up happening is that they stopped using that crazy choreography, and it was a little bit more accepted by the public. So eventually, and here's a video of the ballet. I want to show the whole. So this is like reconstructed by scholars, but again, I don't want to play the whole video. So again, like pretty different than what people are used to. Again, human nature link. This is primitivism. The fourth one that we're talking about is called nationalism, or a way of expressing national identity. Not necessarily saying, it's not about like the country itself. It's just expressing a national identity. Each country at that time has their own quote-unquote nationalist composers. Again, it's going to be hard to memorize all these names, but at least you should know the country and what they mean by nationalism. When we talk about French nationalism, we're talking about rejection of German music. Remember, France and Germany against each other in the war. England, their nationalist type song means getting music from the past and being inspired by it. Finland, theirs was resistance to political dominance. Spain, glorifying national culture. And then the United States, the one that we think of when we think of nationalism, is patriotism and also innovation. So here are some composers that represent those type of nationalism. Again, hard to memorize them all, but hopefully you understand this whole slide. In terms of technology nationalism, we talked about it already. Something we called ethnomusicologists. They studied national folk songs and dances, and they wanted to preserve this music. Remember, folk songs and dances. The problem is that in the past there was no recording. There's no CDs to listen to the folk music. So ethnomusicologists, they tried to understand folk music and try to record it and make it preserved and maybe even market it and to sell. Two famous Hungarians were the ones that studied folk music early. That's Zoltán Kodály and Béla Bartók. So they made transcriptions. So basically they recorded songs in the field. Then they sort of transcribed it, like they write down like sheets and music and how to reproduce the music. And then these recordings became the basis of many other compositions. So how did Bartók integrate folk music? Well, he had them take a priority. Folk tunes and original music were equal. Folk tunes act as like a recurring motto. Themes imitate folk tunes, and then the imitation of the folk spirit. So this is briefly about folk music. So this is an example of field recordings versus composition. I don't have to play the whole thing for you, but this is like a field recording. This is actual real field recording. So that was actual field recording from Bartók, and what Bartók does is that he, takes that recording, transcribes it, and then tries to make his own video, make his own music, and then this is the video from the composition from that field recording. So I don't know if you could tell, especially if you're, especially if you are into music, that his song, this particular one, was something called Romanian folk dances. You could see how it's kind of influenced and inspired by the recordings that we heard in the left video. So this is the folk music, and he implements parts of it in his own music. So the listening selection by Bela Bartok, here's a picture of him, is Romanian Christmas carols, which we watched or listened to. The date is 1915. There's 10 parts. It's a solo piano, and it's a nationalism type song. Again, this one's Romanian Christmas carols. His folk influences, you could say, there's the modes. There's a non-major and minor scales in this song. There's a flexible meter, and then there's something called drones, which again, just very similar to Expressionism, very long held notes. Okay. The two common modes of thinking: Ionian, which is the major scale, and then Aeolian, which is the minor scale. So again, it's hard if you're not very musically inclined, but this is the different types of modes that he uses for his song. And the last one, this one's actually a little bit hard for me to understand. It's called Atonality. Atonality, the prefix a meaning without or not. So think of this way: in this timeline, we have common practice tonality, but then they start to be a getting away from this, what they call rhythm, and they do something called chromatism or chromaticism. Chromaticism, we're talking about being very difficult to determine the function of a chord or chords in a progression. It's just kind of hard to understand the rhythm, I guess you could say. And there's like no sense of when it became this chromaticism in the 19th century. Schoenberg, which we talked about earlier, he started this movement called the emancipation of dissonance. And emancipation of dissonance, we're talking about there's always a relationship between the pitches, but there's no sense of a scale or tonality. So pantonal was this term for Schoenberg's atonal style. So think about atonal being without a tone, and Schoenberg made his own brand of it called pantonal. This was promoted by the Second Viennese School, which we just talked about earlier: Schoenberg, Berg, and Webern. So atonality refers not to a specific movement, but to a technique in which music lacks a tonic. It could, for instance, appear in expressionist or primitivist composition. So atonality, or Schoenberg's term, pantonal. So here's an example. I'm not going to play the whole song, but here's an example of a highly chromatic, restless, melodic song. This one's called Langsamer Satz. So this is Webern. It's pre-atonal, and again, they're saying that, like, oh, this is so chromatic, this is so different. Anyway, why don't we just break tonality altogether? So the last listening selection, the last classical music song we listened to is called Six Bagatelles for String Quartet, or String Quartet by Webern, 1911 to 1913. It's a string quartet, and it's atonal. When we talk about different descriptions for the song: pitch aggregate. So this term means that all 12 pitches of the chromatic scale, or within a 12-tone row, these 12 pitches appear gradually in this work. So we're talking about all 12 of them are there. The emphasis on timbre, not traditional melody. So we're talking about pizzicato, which is plucked strings, and mute, which alters the timbre. Pointillism, we're talking about very sparse texture. It's not very it's hard to explain, but it doesn't have the texture in the song. And here's another music term for you: Klangfarben melody, which means tone color melody, which we talked about earlier. How can I say this? It just has I guess I don't know how best to describe it other than it's tone color. So here are, I guess, different types of examples of videos of it, but I don't want to play it too long. That actually ends section 2 of music. I hope you understand most of it. Again, I'm not the best at music or classical music, but I just wanted you to get the gist of it. Again, if you read through this section, I think it's very easy to comprehend and very easy to do well on this quiz or scrimmage for this section. So if any questions, let me know, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Take care, and I'll see y'all later.